Welcome Internet. Today we're going to be talking about the psychodynamic theories and approaches to self-harm and suicide. So this was a subscriber's request and I think that it's a very important topic to talk about. I will even go so far as to say it's essential for many reasons. So what are the main theories behind self-harm? Well, there are many theories as there are many clinical realities. What you have to understand is that all of this, what I'm going to talk about, is multifaceted, multi-layered. And I do believe that there is not one theory that explains everything, that it's case by case, person per person, and fundamentally that one cannot compare the subjectivity and limit it to an action. For example, if scarification for some people might mean something for some very specific people and something completely different for others. And I think that this is where the crux comes, is that there's a richness in the theories because there's a richness in clinical reality of the cases. And last thing before we properly dive into this topic, if you're a layperson seeing this video, please note that this is not a video that is addressed to heal an individual per se. This video is more educational than anything else. And if you find value in it, very well. If you need more help, please know that there are often hotlines or services that exist and that can help you deal with these issues. So here on this channel, I'm not here to give advice or tips, so I'm not going to do that. I'm here to talk about the theory. And I think it's important because in these types of videos, sometimes people that can fall onto them almost at random. So I just wanted to get this out of the way, that if you need help, please reach out for help. But this video is really for educational purposes only. Right. So what are the theories on self-harm? Well, as I was saying, it's a multitude of theories. And in those theories, there are many that I find very valuable. And one of the first and main ones is this idea that self-harm has meaning. And that meaning is very different and very wide-ranging. One of the theories, which I found to be of high interest, is that when there is self-harm, it's an attack often on the self, but on self or the ego. So let's start with the ego. Well, Didier Anzieu had this very interesting concept of the skin ego, which very, very simply sends us back to this idea of the first interactions with mother are always via the skin. For example, when there is tenderness, when there is, for example, kissing, when there is petting or basically hugging, it's always via the skin. The skin is the first organ of the body to experience that warmth, experience that interaction, to experience all of that love. And when, for example, there is bloodletting or cutting or scarification, what is attacked is that, in a way, first contact, that primary contact in which our sense of self develops, our egos, our identities are built upon, are based upon. And that primary attack is to basically show that something is not going well, that the skin itself is attacked. And that attack on the skin is an attack on the relationship and on the link to others, because we experienced, and we still in many regards, experience our relationships with others through contact, be it shaking one's hand, be it a pat on the back, and even sexual relationships with people like partners, right? So contact is still omnipresent, and this attack on the skin is an attack on the relation. And why so? So that's a very important question. Why would people that self-harm attack their skin and part of themselves and the relationship? Well, very simply, according to Gardner, it's because at the core, people have had very bad experiences, be it with a caregiver or with other people. But those experiences have built up within the individual, have grown to such an extent that they've internalized bad relations. Those bad relations created an imago or an object, as you wish, that has built into the individual and has a certain force. So in a way, attacking the skin is a way of cutting ties with that object, of being able to make a very specific delineation between the individual and the other. In a way, it's as if through the act of cutting one's skin, the individual was saying, I am myself and you are you. I am not you and you are not me. It's a statement that is made through action. And that action tends to be basically a very important moment for the individual. They often feel, on a subjective level, a lot of power through the act of cutting, as it gives them a form of elation, as if they did not need other people, as if they were virtually all powerful because they regain a form of agency, a form of control, that in a way they are in control of their pain, of their suffering, and of their bodies, which gives them the illusion of not needing others, or to be able to manage the pain through the body, that the mental pain is managed through the body. And it also, importantly enough, creates a dynamic in which basically this internal pain that is subjective in nature, through the act of self-harm, is made objective. It is made objective by its repercussions on the body and what it happens to the body. Regardless of the way of self-harm, it always impacts the body in a way or in another, be it by bloodletting, scarification, breaking one's bones, breaking an arm, and so on and so forth, right? So there's always an impact on the body. And even things like smoking or drinking in excess also have an impact on the body. It's not just the mind, the body is impacted as well. So very simply, this impact on the body creates both a feeling of elation and a reality to subjective phenomena or psychic reality, something that others can witness. And sometimes, for certain individuals, not everyone, I need to make this very clear, it's a way of getting back to what they perceive as the bad object, i.e. the bad relationship. In a way, it's a way of showing that they, how can I say, that they are giving the hurt and pain as exhibition to the other. In a way, it's a way of saying, look at what you have done to me. Look in what state you've pushed me in. That you are responsible for my self-harm. And you are powerless to stop me. So in these cases, often it is in a very deeply disturbed relationship that people tend to think like this, tend to have these fantasies of revenge, of self-destruction as a way of destroying others, as an indirect way of hurting others. But they can also happen in the therapeutic relationship, which makes things very complicated, because there is sometimes, as Otto Kernberg postulated, certain forms of self-harm that are linked to malignant narcissism, where it's about triumphing on the therapist rather than seeking help. It's, in a way, an identification with a sadistic parent within, and that the hurt is there to paralyze the thought and the thinking of the therapist. But these are not too common. Most people that self-harm, it is often, more often than not, a cry for help. This is something that has been advanced by Winnicott and then further expanded by Maltz. I hope I said the name right. In a way, the acts of self-harm are a deep cry for help on the part of someone else, a moment in which the pain can no longer be ignored, both by the individual and the environment the pain has left a mark, and that mark is a testament of how things are going badly or poorly for the individual. Therefore, it's a cry for help. And this is something that I think is often very true. The people that self-harm, most of the time, not all the time, do not necessarily want to commit suicide, but want to be helped. And because the pain, the mental pain, is so intense, so incredibly vivid, that they cannot process it mentally. In a way, if we were to do the parallel with Bion's theories, the mental suffering has become beta elements in which it's so massive and intense that the individual has no way of transforming them on their own, meaning that they are there and they are unbearable. So hurting or trying to commit suicide is a way of fundamentally calling someone else into the play, calling someone else to help, calling someone else to be able to process this. And this is the role of the therapist. The therapist is there to be able to transform, to make that acting out on the body something that can be mentalized, processed, something that can be even managed and coped with. And I think that this is also an essential part of the therapeutic work, is to try and help the patient be able to cope with the self-harm by trying to process what is happening, to verbalize it, to put it into meaning, to give it meaning also sometimes. A meaning that the patient is not always aware of, or at least not consciously aware of. And bringing it back into consciousness can sometimes help. Of course, this is also to say that sometimes that form of self-harm can have effects on the relationship, and the psychotherapeutic relationship, I mean. That, for example, the therapist can be in a form of intense preoccupation, that very patient that threatens to commit suicide or to do self-harm takes all of the mental space of the therapist. The therapist thinks for hours on end of that individual. And in those moments, the therapist is in a way replaying the role of a mother that tries to take care of the infant, that tries to find a way of relieving the pain, of transforming enough of those beta elements, of those unbearable elements into something manageable, i.e. the alpha function. And that's the point of Bion, is that the mother transforms those elements into something manageable through the alpha function. And that's what we try to do as therapists. And often those beta elements can also be present in hate, because, and this is also a very important theory, is that sometimes those elements that the individual has inside of them, as I was saying at the very start of the video, can sometimes be some things that are unbearable, like identifications with the aggressor, with the basically the enabler, something that is so inherently destructive and unmanageable that the individual in a way tries to kill themselves or cut themselves or hurt themselves in order to purge themselves, in order to kill that bad object they have inside of them. In a way, this ties into collective fantasies of death and rebirth. And for them, a way of unconsciously doing that would be to die and to kill the bad part of oneself, to be reborn as a fulfilled being, as a being that basically has no longer any ties with the bad object, because the bad object would have been destroyed. There's also this very interesting argument that basically that cycle of death and rebirth could also be seen as a form of regression to the womb, as a fantasy to go back to a more prior state where tension, conflict, disagreeableness, destructivity was not present, and something of a perfect union with a good object. So it's a very interesting thought, and often one that I find very clinically pertinent in what it tries to bring, i.e. that the person is trying to destroy something inside of themselves that they hate, but they're not trying to die. And this is mostly one of the most important points of death, is that most people don't want to die. They want suffering to end, which is very different in essence. And one of the last since I would like to end on, is this idea of the death drive, i.e. that there's something inside of the patient that is so overwhelming, so powerful, of the will to destroy, that it cannot be impeded by the ego or the superego. So, as you might know, I do think that there is such a thing as a death drive, but I didn't want to start with it because once you've talked about the death drive, you don't really have anywhere else to go, as the death drive is a bit of a be-all and end-all of discussion. But the idea here is that sometimes the will to destroy is so powerful that nothing can stop it or prevent it. It overwhelms the ego, it overwhelms the superego. It's just absolutely present, and it even overwhelms the life drive. And in the cases of such important hatred and the death drive, the therapists themselves might feel that the hatred is contagious, that they might feel that hatred inside of them, not for the patient per se, but for the behaviors and for these internalized objects that the patient has and that basically have destroyed him. The therapist feels the echo of that hate inside of themselves. So it's very important in those moments to analyze the hate, because as a therapist can transform that hate inside of them, they can also transform the hate that the patient feels inside of them, both for who they are, but for the bad relationships. Not that the people should be forgiven, this is not what I'm talking about, but that those moments could be basically changed into also be able to rekindle with the feelings of love and affection for the good objects, the people that were hopeful, the people that do love the individual, and often in the fantasies of revenge, because there is those elements in which the individual might feel that they basically commit suicide to take revenge on other people, that what stops them might be this idea that they will hurt the people that they love, that they will hurt the people that really cared for them, which does put a stop to these fantasies, that they don't want to hurt people that they've loved. And even though it is still very painful, I think it's very positive, because that means that there is something worth fighting for in the life of the patient, and also something on which a therapist can build upon in order to help the patient, how can I say, diminish this self-harm and suicidality. So basically this is pretty much it for the main theories in regards to self-harm and suicide. I need to specify this, that this video is not exhaustive, right? There might be dozens of other important and interesting theories that I haven't talked about today, but unfortunately I can't cover everything in a YouTube video. And also the article I've used as reference, I'll put it in the description if you're interested in it. If you have any questions or any comments, feel free to do so in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.